Well, welcome to this episode where we are getting closer and closer to being finished with this habit, and we're going to move on to the sleeves. And so this calls for a big prayer because sleeves are a hard part of the habit. And so this prayer is Cardinal Meyer's nightly prayer that he prayed as part of night prayer. So some of our sisters may already know it. So we'll begin. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. For all thou hast given, Deo gratias. For all thou hast withheld, Deo gratias. For all thou hast withdrawn, Deo gratias. For all thou hast permitted, Deo gratias. For all thou hast prevented, Deo gratias. For all thou hast forgiven me, Deo gratias. For all thou hast prepared for me, Deo gratias. For the death thou hast chosen for me, Deo gratias. For the place thou art keeping for me in heaven, Deo gratias. For having created me to love thee for eternity, Deo gratias, Deo gratias, Deo gratias. Alright, so we're going to put our sleeves in. Now, if you have a new pattern, in 2018, we redesigned the sleeves. So they are very obviously which part's the front, this shorter part, and which part's the back, this big loop, because you want your sleeve to be able to move forward more. We also, when we labeled them front and back. So, if we think about putting right side of the fabric to the right side of the fabric, I have my habit inside out, which you can see the seams, and I have my sleeve right side out. So I can't see the seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the right side of the habit, or the outer part of the habit, to the outside of the habit inside the habit, like this. So, right side is touching right side. And when I do that, if I look at my marks now, my sleeve, this says back, but it's on the front. This says front, but it's on the back by the zipper. So I know I have the sleeve in the wrong armhole. Okay, that's all right. I'm just going to move to the other side. Again, I'm going to connect the right side of the sleeve to the right side of the habit in the armpit. So it's right under here where I'm working. And kind of rotating it around here. So just in looking at this first part, I'm lining up these two seams in the armpit. And again, kind of like I do with the shoulder top, I'm kind of rolling them together, making sure that those seams are lined up, because although few people will be looking in your armpit, the Lord knows, and we want it to be straight. So I'm putting 2 pins like I did for the shoulder top here, and then I'm going to push a pin through 5/8 down where I'm going to actually sew a seam, and I want to see if where I sew they line up. And they do. So the pin is coming out pretty much on the other side through the seam. So I'm happy with that. So I've got the bottom part of the sleeve anchored. I'm going to anchor the top part, which is marked with a mark when Sister labeled her pieces. And that line goes with this shoulder top seam up here at the top of the shoulder. Now if you have an older sleeve, you might be used to the top of this curve is what you line up with that top part of the sleeve. If you have a new pattern, a 2018 sleeve, you're going by the mark with this seam, not paying attention to the top of the curve of the sleeve, because we've rotated the sleeve kind of in its pocket. Okay, so now I have my 2 points kind of fixed. I'm going to take my time and pin in this sleeve, and I start from the armpit, and I put pins. And I'm not really that concerned right now about getting out all the puckers. I'm just doing an initial pinning. And much like I did with the collar, I'm going to go back over this and work in any excess. If you have a more recent pattern, they've been designed not to have as much excess that you have to work in here, because the shape of the sleeve is different. You don't need it. So it's really not that much extra to work in. They fit pretty well right into the hole. This part's not serged. Because it's on a curve and you move a lot, if you serged it, it would restrict that ability for the fabric to move and twist and turn. So that's why it's not serged. So you may have more fraying like this. That's okay. We'll take care of that at a later step. And you'll notice, as I come to the top, if I keep pinning this smoothly, what I end up with is a huge pucker. That's like an inch of material. And you're like, well, what am I going to do with that? I don't want puff sleeves. And if you do want puff sleeves, they're not allowed on our habit, so just dismiss that thought. Where do we want this excess fabric? So where do you want more fabric in your habit to be able to move? You want it in this back third here. So you don't want it at the top, you don't want it in the front. It's designed to be in this back area back here, because that's where you're moving and stretching, and that's where we want motion in the sleeve. Now this is an old sleeve pattern, so you'll get a lot of this pulling and things on it, but with this new sleeve, the way it's designed, hopefully, that won't be as bad. Okay, so we're working on the back part, the zippers here, of this sleeve. And this is the shoulder top seam, so where do I want to move this fabric is into this area here, between my two fingers. So now I'm going to work that in. So what I do is I make it smooth with my left hand here, and then I just ever so slightly move my thumb back a little bit. You might not even have seen it. You ready? Here it is. Boom. Again. Boom. Right there. It's teeny. I'm moving it back a teeny amount. And I'm going to do that kind of repetitively. So here I'm smooth, and then boom, I slide it back a little bit. And as I continue to do this, smooth, slide it back, I'm working in or easing in that extra bubble of fabric. So I'm smooth, and then I'm sliding it back. I'm using pins that I can sew over. I probably should have told you that at the beginning, because often I will sew over these. Okay, so my bubble, as you can see, is getting smaller because I've worked it in. So smooth, and then easing back a little bit. And I'm getting down here, smooth, and then easing back. And so distributing, it's not a word, distributing
Yes.
this fabric across this whole part of the back, it's not going to pucker because I have so many pins in it, and I'm confident. And it's not going to be a puff sleeve either, but it's going to work in. Again, I make sure I pin down the edges of these so they don't get folded over and end up kind of scrunchy under there. I'm going to switch these pins to this inside where I'll be able to get to them more easily. And now I'm happy, I'm very happy with how that turned out. So you can see there's a little bit of rippling here, but as I'm sewing, that's not going to create a pucker because it's so small. So as I'm sewing over this, I'm going to be smoothing, and it's not going to create a pucker, which is great. Okay, I'm going to re-smooth the front because I just did a preliminary pin on that, although it didn't have any excess material, which is, again, the way it's kind of been designed. So now, if that took you 20 minutes, I wouldn't be surprised. Sometimes it takes a long time to pin in a sleeve. You can leave this and sew it a week from now, a month from now, whatever you want. I would not recommend pinning in both sleeves and then sewing them both. I think it's good to pin one, sew one, and then pin the other and sew the other because it gets bulky, as you'll see on the machine as we're turning to sew this in. So now we're going to sew the sleeve in. So there are different ways to sew this on the machine. So you might have a machine like this where it's nice and flat and you use it like that, and then this piece comes off, making essentially what you have a narrow area here so that if you want to sew your sleeve on the outside like this, you could. You could put it right at 5/8 and sew and rotate this around. And that's actually what a lot of people do. That they continue to sew and rotate, and so you've got part of the sleeve down here and basically this kind of going into the sleeve hole. I don't mind that. What I like better though, personally, is to leave this on. I've tried it both ways. I think it's an example of just personal preference in how you're sewing. I like to sew looking at the sleeve side because I've worked in the excess material here and I want to see it visually as I'm sewing it. I want to see that this isn't puckering because the sleeve hole is always bigger than the armpit hole in the shell or the bodice of the habit. And so you would always be more likely to see puckers in the sleeve side of it, so in this side, as opposed to the shell side. So that's kind of why I prefer this way, but it doesn't have to be done this way. But that's what I'm going to show you. So I'll show you this way first. So I'm going to start with the armpit section where these two seams are coming together, and I just glance first and make sure that this is open, and I kind of lay it flat. bring it under here, and this, we're going to sew at 5/8. So I'm following this line here on this sewing machine, lining it up with the edge that I'm sewing. Okay, so I bring my needle down, drop my presser foot, and with these pins, they're narrow, so I can sew over them at a low speed. If you're not confident, you can just baste this in. You're going to reinforce it anyways, so if you want to sew it at a stitch length of 4, that's fine, and then go over it again with a 2.5. I'm going to go to 2.5 now. My back stitch. Okay. I stop to readjust. My needle is down, and I rotate, and I am smoothing out the fabric underneath too. So I can feel with my fingers here, this is smooth, this is where I'm getting ready to sew, it's totally smooth. I'm keeping my line of vision kind of right here. I want this edge across from the needle to be right at that 5/8 mark. Again, you can see I'm sewing a curve on a circle, so this is a little tricky. Coming up kind of along the front part here where it's curving even more, feeling with my fingers still, making sure it's smooth. And I'm making sure that this seam on the shoulder top is folded over flat, because it's going to feel like a big bump under there, but that's all it is. So I'm coming around the top part of the shoulder, and I kind of keep turning my habit so that it doesn't get bunchy and pull on me. And however you can get your hands in here, this is kind of a tricky part, the top of the shoulder. So I'm just going to go slow. Sometimes I might raise up the foot and smooth things out with my finger, and then put the foot back down. Again, staying at 5/8. And this is where I've worked in a lot of this excess fabric, so it's going to just take some time to make sure I'm smooth. Now, you may think, Sister Agnes Mary, you just sewed a pucker. Maybe I did. I'll go back and fix it later. That's okay. Keep going. Unless it's like a huge thing where you like sewed part of the sleeve underneath there, you can go back and rip it out and fix it easily. And back stitch. Okay. Looks nice and smooth. No puckers. No unusual holes. My armpit has a cross in it. I like it. And across the back, nice and smooth. No puckers. Deo gratias. Yay! So now we're going to do the other side. And I'm going to pin it in, and then I'm going to show you how to sew it with taking this piece off. Okay, so now we're going to do the other sleeve in that alternative way by taking off this piece of the sewing machine and sewing it with kind of like pretending this is the arm going in the sleeve here. And I'm still going to start at the armpit. And the top part of the sleeve then is going to end up down here, and it'll just kind of twist around. So I'm still going to do this at 5/8, so keeping my eye across from the needle here, lining it up with this 5/8 mark here with the edge of the fabric. So you can see it's rolling smoothly around here, and I have a little bit more ability to smooth and see this piece of the fabric to make it lay flat as we go along. Now at this point, I'm going to bring this part of the habit down because that's the way I'm rotating, and it'll help me out. This can be the part that's tricky for me doing it this way, is the top part of the shoulder where that tight turn is. Now I'm on the back part of the habit where I've got all of that extra fabric worked in between these pins. And this is kind of the blind part of doing it this way, is you can't really see that you don't have puckers on that, but you can feel it somewhat with your fingers. I guess I'm more of a visual person, but if you are used to doing it this way, this is a good way to do it too. There's more than one way to put a sleeve in, so let's see how this one turns out. So that's the back part, and there are no puckers. When I iron that out, it'll look nice and smooth. In the armpit, those seams line up really nicely, and on the front, no puckers. Okay, so now we've attached the sleeve on, and we're going to make sure that we like the way it looks before we double stitch and secure it in. And so just looking at Sister's sleeve, I want to know, like, how does it move? How does it feel when you're moving? Is it tight anywhere?
Nope, it's good.
so she's got good motion. And then I'm going to have her do some different moves. So like putting your hands forward, and I can see that it's not pulling too much back here. And she's got plenty of room here to help with motion. Now this looks, remember, because we twisted the sleeve, put your hands back. Simon says, hold still. So remember we twisted the sleeve and rotated it forward, so the crest, or the top part of that curve, is actually back here. And so we want to make sure that it's not looking pokey. So that looks a little bit pokey, but when I pull it out and I see, when I press that, it's actually going to look quite smooth when I press the inside there. So I'm actually really pleased with how this sleeve fits. It falls nicely on sister's shoulder, and so I'm confident now we can go ahead and finish the sleeve by stitching the inside and then finishing it with the pinking shears. Hello! In case you're wondering, I didn't shrink, the table grew, but I can still sew like this. So I'm gonna reinforce what I just stitched. I've heard it said that you shouldn't stitch directly on top of the other stitch because that makes it weaker. I don't understand that, but I'm willing to accept it. So I'm going to stitch like kind of right next to it, but not right on top of it. And this is an example of a machine that doesn't really come all the way apart. So if you look at that, it could fit a sleeve under there, but it would be kind of tight. So I'm going to do it the way I showed you by looking at the sleeve itself rather than the shell. So I'm going to go right on the outside of this seam. So you can see they're just like that close to each other. So if you're doing some sort of heavy labor and you pop this seam, this back one is still there. That will hold your sleeve on until you have time to mend it. This is that top curve that can get kind of bunchy, so I'm just going to still take my time. And that sleeve hopefully will never come off. Trim these threads. And I've just stitched kind of two lines right next to each other all the way around. And so now I'm going to get my pinking shears and I will trim this off so that it doesn't end up to keep fraying like this. I'll trim right along there. Okay, we're almost done with the sleeves. I'm sure you're happy. These are pinking shears. They're a zigzag cut, same like you used for the inside of the cincture. You may, in the past, have cut your whole habit out with pinking shears. So the purpose of these is to prevent fraying over time. So if we were to leave this habit this way without cutting these, over time, with washing and wearing, this would fray more and more and more until eventually it would get into the seam here and you would have a hole on the outside of your pocket. Okay, that's what we don't want. So there are two ways to do this. If you're super confident, you could serge this all the way around, serging both pieces to each other and finishing it like you finish these seams. I have never been able to do that. And it gives me a lot of fear that after getting to this point of my habit, that if I mess that up, I might have to start over. And that's scary. So I have always used pinking shears because it does the same purpose. And in my habits that I have, it's done a great job of keeping it from fraying. And for me, the risk-benefit is much better to use pinking shears than serging, especially if you're not comfortable serging. So this is how I do it. I make sure that I only have the two pieces of fabric, that it's not folded over like this, and then I pinking shear, and then I've got a funny hole in my sleeve, okay? So pay attention to what you're doing. You've worked so hard on this habit. Don't mess it up now. No pressure. So when I do my pinking shears, I'm trimming, and sometimes the first starting bit is a little bit awkward. Okay, what I'm doing is I want to have a full zigzag. I hope you can see that. My finger there. A full zigzag cut. So if I went to there, that's not a full zigzag cut. It's going to keep fraying. So I want to have that full cut, and I want to leave as much here as possible as I can in the seam allowance to keep it strong. So I just continue trimming around. And it looks like I've got about 2/8 to 3/8 here of excess fabric. So again, this is why it's important when you're sewing your sleeve that you're sewing it at 5/8 so that you have enough to trim here. Now I've got that one done, and I'll do this side too. Okay, so now I've got both sides done. And the last step is I'm going to iron the seam allowance of the sleeve open so that on the outside of the habit this looks nice and crisp. We need to be able to move our arms more.
You do.
So what I've
kind
done
of constricted.
is really a lot simple.
Simplicity.
Is I've redesigned the sleeve so that we don't have that problem anymore. So we've gone from this sort of a curve to that sort of a curve.
It looks like a rainbow.
It is. It's a rainbow, and it's a promise of better motion so that you can mop and chainsaw it. And so it ends up looking like this.
Wonderful.
Which is great. It's a great thing. And call now for your new 2017 sleeves. Unless you want to gusset, which I don't know how to make.
G-U-S-S-E-T.
G-U-S-S-E-T.
I want a new sleeve, please.
I want a new sleeve, please.
Moving like a T-Rex.
Moving like a T-Rex.
I don't have any room to flex.
I don't have any room to flex. Restricted with my praise hands. And I can't see to far off lands.
Gussets are too hard to sew.
Gussets are too hard to sew.
Do you have something I want to know?
Do you have something I want to know? New sleeves.
New sleeves.
New sleeves.
New sleeves.
New sleeves for you.